All right, everybody, here we are back with another segment of Why Race Matters by Michael Levin. This is chapter 3. We skipped chapter 2 completely, and we're going to skip a lot of chapter 3, but there are some parts that are worth covering. Probably about 25%. Well, I'm not saying that you shouldn't read all of it or know all of it, it's just not all of it lends itself to being read. It would become very dry. I'm trying to keep this somewhat entertaining and informative. If you want to read I'm not trying to hide anything. If you want to read the whole thing, I got the link in the bio. So I'm not skipping for obfuscation purposes, just so you don't fall asleep. Because not everyone is cut out for the dryness of statistics. Race differences in intelligence and temperament. The burden of proof. A natural starting point for discussing variations in intelligence and temperament is the psychometric literature. This literature does indeed reveal large group differences, and I will soon turn to it, but to begin there creates a false impression that the scientific results are surprising, contrary to appearances, or that they involve a special technical sense of the word intelligence. In reality, the races appear to differ apart from any tests. Black children do not perform in school as if they are as able and motivated as white or Asian children. Black adults do not succeed in science, art, commerce, or the professions as if they were as able and motivated as white or Asian adults. On the whole, blacks encountered in everyday life, in the press, and on television news broadcasts do not behave like whites or Asians. Moreover, evidence of the equal intelligence of the races would presumably exist were the races in fact equal, and be prominently cited by the many social scientists who passionately believe they are. Yet, this does not happen. Authors like Gould and Kamin tirelessly criticize studies that show black intelligence to be lower than white, but cite no black performances that indicate high mean intelligence. This is one of those cases in which absence of evidence for a hypothesis constitutes evidence against it. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Everyday observation, together with the failure of egalitarians to produce evidence that the races are equal, disconfirms racial parity. If we knew in advance that the races are equally intelligent, we could confidently attribute the appearance of lower black intelligence to distorting factors such as bias. But lacking any prior assurance of racial parity, appearances are all we have to go on. It is possible that various forms of bias, rather than lower intelligence, explain black academic failure. Without independent confirmation that they do, however, this possibility plus failure does not support intellectual parity. A race difference in performance may fail to show an underlying difference in ability, but it cannot show underlying similarity. To put matters bluntly, the question is not why anyone would believe the races are unequal in intelligence, but why anyone would believe them equal. When someone asserts that black intellectual performance would be equal of that of whites were society free of bias, the proper response is, "What makes you think so?" The burden of proof, usually placed on those who deny the intellectual equality of the races, rests squarely on those who assert it. Stereotypes. Everyday impressions might be dismissed as stereotypes, but they are in fact a modest source of evidence. This evidence is not strictly essential to what follows, but stereotypes attract so much irrational scorn that some clarification is in order. My personal experience with being stolen from confirms stereotypes. I've only been stolen from 3 times in my life, and all 3 times it was by a black person. And it's not like I'm surrounded by only black people. The received view is that ethnic generalizations serve psychological needs, often disreputable, such as, in the Sartre-Bettelheim theory, relief of guilt and enhancement of self-worth by projection of forbidden desires onto an outgroup. On this view, the prevalence of a stereotype is unrelated to its truth. An alternative view is that stereotypes extrapolate experience, and so tend to be true or at least contain a germ of truth. In favor of the second view is the fact that, like many incautiously worded statements, stereotypes become more plausible when interpreted charitably. Someone who says blacks are criminals need not mean that all blacks are criminals, or that all criminals are black, both plainly false, but that disproportionately many blacks are criminals, which is true. Stereotypers are either grossly stupid or misunderstood, and gross stupidity is less common than misunderstanding. Furthermore, the received view makes a mystery of flattering stereotypes, such as German efficiency, and neutral ones, such as the tendency of Italians to gesticulate when talking, neither suited to bolstering feelings of superiority. The mystery vanishes if Germans and Italians are ascribed these traits because they are observed to have them. Nor does the received view explain how particular groups are assigned particular traits. If the array of outgroups is a tabula rasa, a blank slate, with trait ascription independent of observation, which groups get which traits must be arbitrary. The conventional theory addresses this problem by calling stereotypes self-fulfilling. Ridiculous. Made true by being accepted. Thus, blacks are said to be good at basketball because everyone, including blacks, thinks that they are. An expectation that leads black kids to practice a lot, and for that reason excel, and reinforce the original belief. However, while positive feedback can perhaps help sustain a stereotype once it is accepted, the question remains of why it was accepted in the first place. Why were blacks ever thought to be good at basketball? This problem also vanishes if the ascription of stereotypes is initially controlled by perception of black ability at that sport. Cross-culturally robust stereotypes are unlikely to manifest identical psychological needs. Generally speaking, the best explanation of a belief held by numerous non-colluding observers is that the belief is correct. Should 10 motorists report seeing a cow in a meadow, it would be a remarkable coincidence if all 10 needed to see a cow. The hypothesis that they all had similar bovine visual experiences, which experiences were caused by something bovine, assumes the fewest coincidences. Likewise, the simplest explanation of robust stereotypes is that they report reliable observations. Stereotypes about blacks in particular have shown great constancy. Peters records the agreement of all European cultures that blacks are unintelligent, brutal, and highly sexed, a view of blacks usually associated with pre-civil rights era America. Medieval Arab slave traders regarded blacks as rhythmic, highly sexed, unintelligent, and prone to merriment. Given their cultural achievements, Arabs would hardly have needed to feel superior to anyone. They may have been influenced by the servile status of the blacks they knew, but they did not regard their slaves from other groups as unintelligent. Romans prized Greek and Jewish slaves for their intelligence. The best explanation of this cross-cultural concordance is that the blacks observed by Europeans, Americans, and Arabs displayed the traits in question, or did they all conspire to give blacks a bad rep? What sounds more likely? And it's not just them. Japanese people feel the same way. Chinese people feel the same way. Mexicans feel the same way. So it seems like everyone can agree, except for the anti-racists, which is really just a euphemism for virtue signalers. A final point suggesting that stereotypes extrapolate experience is that they are deemed more acceptable when couched in positive language. Time magazine criticized the National Football League's ban on spiking the ball after touchdowns for penalizing what it called the black flair. It is hard to imagine Time citing black showboating or extroversion, although these words differ from flair only in evaluative force. If racial generalizations were suspect because they were thought to be false, generalizations couched in favorable language would also be suspect, which they seldom are. Stereotypes are strongly condemned in contemporary American society. Poll data are ambiguous, suggesting that whites, at least, are increasingly unwilling to assent publicly to any group generalization, but also that whites are very likely to be thought more intelligent and less rhythmic than blacks. Stereotypes persist, so something must sustain them. An obvious candidate is observation. You know what I find hilarious and also a little disturbing is when people get mad at you for using stereotypes that are neutral, like black people eat chicken or watermelon. So, what? So, like, first of all, that's true. Second of all, so what? How is that? Is that an insult? That's racist. Like, really? That upsets you. Chinese people eat rice. Is that racist? Does that mean Japanese people eat sushi? Oh my god, racist. Chinese people eat dogs. Oh, that's negative. Now we're being really racist, really negative. It's also tiring. Okay. Race differences in intelligence. Test data. The main scientific evidence of black-white differences in intelligence is black and white performance on standardized intelligence tests. Competent authorities agree that, as measured by the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, the Raven's Progressive Matrices, and similar instruments, the mean IQ of whites exceeds that of American blacks by about 1 white standard deviation. When IQ is scaled so that the white mean is 100 and the standard deviation is 15, the black mean is about 85 and the black standard deviation slightly less than 15. This difference was first observed among Army recruits during World War I and has remained fairly constant. The most thorough survey of the literature through 1966 is Shuey's The Testing of Negro Intelligence, 1966, which reports 382 comparative studies involving 80 different tests administered to hundreds of thousands of black and white children, high school and college students, military personnel, civilian adults, deviates, and criminals. The average black score in these studies was a bit below 85 and the average white IQ a bit above 100, with the difference in the means in the various studies ranging from 12 to 18 points. Overlap, the proportion of black scores at or above the white comparison group mean, averaged 12%. W.E.B. Du Bois' reference to the talented 10th turns out to have been a remarkably accurate statistical intuition. In other words, 88% of blacks, and by definition 50% of whites, score below the white mean. This 50 to 88 ratio is not constant throughout the IQ distribution. As we shall see, the ratio falls when IQ rises. The editors of Profile of American Youth remark that, quote, as in the civilian testing experience, there is unanimity of results in military testing. At each age level and under a variety of social and geographical conditions, blacks, on the average, regularly score below whites. Scarr, who favors an environmental explanation of race differences in IQ, finds that mean differences in IQ scores between racial, ethnic, and social class groups are too well known to be restated at any length. Briefly, there is often found an average difference of 10 to 20 points on IQ tests between black and white samples. In general, Caucasian, American Indian, Eskimo, and Oriental children are shown to have higher IQ scores and more rapid cognitive development than children of African or Australian Aboriginal origin, particularly after the first 2 years of life. Social and legal prohibitions have made the controlled testing of blacks increasingly difficult. At this writing, for instance, it is illegal in California, surprise, surprise, to assess the IQ of black children for placement in special education classes. Wonder why that is. Criticisms of IQ. Informed egalitarians accept the race difference in IQ tests, but dispute its significance, usually for one of the following 5 reasons. 1. There is no such thing as intelligence, a claim based in turn on the multiplicity of human abilities, the supposed multiplicity of kinds of intelligence, or the supposed multiplicity of meanings given the word intelligence by different people and cultures. Number 2, there may be such a thing as intelligence, but so-called intelligence tests do not measure it. Number 3, intelligence tests may measure the intelligence of whites, but not that of blacks. Number 4, intelligence tests may measure intelligence for all races, but individual differences in intelligence are due entirely to environment. And number 5, individual differences in intelligence may be due in part to genetic factors, but race differences are due entirely to environment. The tendency of egalitarians to jump from one of these positions to another makes it hard to keep discussion on track, since each of them is incompatible with the rest. If there is no such thing as intelligence, as number 1 asserts, then there is nothing for IQ tests to measure, or fail to measure, and no intelligence differences to explain environmentally or genetically. To put the point another way around, there must be such a characteristic as intelligence for individuals to differ with respect to it, whatever the reason. Attributing a race difference to environmental factors is consistent with blaming it on whites, but not with denying it. That puts you in kind of a pickle, all you so-called anti-racists out there who are actually very racist. To continue, if, as number 2 asserts, IQ tests do not measure intelligence, they do not measure the intelligence of whites or blacks, nor do their results about individual or groups need explaining. If intelligence tests are biased, per number 3, there is again no race difference in intelligence to explain, either environmentally or genetically. If, per number 4, all variations in intelligence is due to environmental variation, genes play no role, and the first clause of number 5 is false, which, to remind you, was individual differences in intelligence may be due in part to genetic factors. So, there's a lot of contradicting ideas put forth by people who don't want to accept the truth. That's basically the gist of this paragraph. These points of logic may be summed up in 2 simple precepts. First, you cannot say that there is no such thing as intelligence and that everyone's intelligence is equal. If there is no such thing as intelligence, individuals cannot be compared with respect to it. Second, you cannot say that racism stunts the mental development of black children and that black children are as intelligent as white. If the mental development of black children has been stunted by racism or by anything else, it follows that their intelligence has been limited. Lower black intelligence might then be the fault of whites, but, once again, individuals and groups may possess traits for which they are not to blame. The idea that environmentally caused does not imply unreal is just an aspect of the phenotype-genotype distinction. Levels of intelligence are phenotypes, and whether individuals or groups share a phenotype is an issue quite separate from why they do or do not. Phenotypic differences can be far more obvious than their causes. Should the black and white intelligence poly gene turn out to be identical, and there is a mean difference in intelligence due entirely to environmental factors, all that would follow is that blacks would be, on average, as intelligent as whites if both were raised identically, and would have been, on average, as intelligent as whites had it not been for some environmental factors, perhaps including racism. It would not follow that blacks are as intelligent. So you could say that they would be as smart if we didn't oppress them, but by saying that, you're admitting that they aren't as smart.